Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you all once again to another edition of Renew Education. It's my pleasure to host this very incredible section with two highly esteemed speakers that have worked with over long years of experience in energy citizenship. So it's my pleasure to have Jane and Dr. BinBin with us today. Our first speaker will be Jane. I'm just going to give you a little brief about her, and she's going to go on to tell us more about herself and the work that she is currently doing. Um, I hope we can all see my screen now. All right, thank you.
Yes, we see your screen. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So it's my pleasure to welcome Jane Cohen to introduce her to us. She's a senior program manager at the International Energy Agency and leads the people-centered clean energy transitions team. She has an extensive background in energy, environmental health, public health, and human rights. She previously served as the executive director for the Governor's Office of Climate Action and the Green Economy, and as a senior policy advisor for the governor of New Jersey, where she oversaw the environment and energy portfolios. While working for the Human Rights Watch Health and Human Rights Division from 2007 to 2015, you can see that's more than a decade of experience. She used that investigative research skills to develop environment and human rights initiatives and conducted international advocacy on public health and environment issues. It's my pleasure to have Jane with us here today, and I'll pass it over to Jane to for her own section. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Shalom, and thanks everyone. I'm really happy to be here today and to get to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing at the IEA, and then a little bit more specifically on how we think about energy communities and engaging citizens in kind of clean energy. So I am going to share my screen. I couldn't get the volume to work, so let's see if I can share my screen. That's a level of tech that hopefully I should be able to do. Let's see. Okay, let's try this. Can you see my screen?
It's loading.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, amazing. All right. So I'm first just going to talk a little bit about the work of the IEA. So let me just ask, and I know a lot of people don't have their screens on, but does everybody know what the IEA, the International Energy Agency, is and like what we do?
No.
Okay, I heard one no, so that gives me a good excuse to to talk about it a little bit. So the International Energy Agency is a intergovernmental organization. So it's made up of member governments, and it was created in 1974. And it was really then about helping to ensure reliable energy security, and really focused very much on kind of technical energy solutions. And it had 30, so now today it has 32 member countries. And it has 4 accession countries and 13 association countries. But I really want to make this point because back in 1974, and really up until fairly recently, the IEA was really thought of as an agency that was looking at kind of energy projections, energy security, very, very technical. But in the last few years, it's really become much more focused on how, what pathways do we have for clean energy? How do we address climate change? How do we think about critical minerals? And importantly, for my area of work, how do we think about the role of people in clean energy transitions and in energy more generally? So it's gone from being extremely technical, and we still are a very technical agency, but now there's this other component of, in order for clean energy transitions to happen, in order for energy systems to function, we really need to think about the people who are at the heart of them. And so it was with this in mind that in 2021, the agency convened the Global Commission on People-Centered Clean Energy Transitions. And this was really about asking the question of, when we talk about people at the center of clean energy transitions, what do we really mean? And so the Global Commission, which was made up of energy ministers from around the world, it was made up of labor leaders and youth organizations, nonprofits, businesses, indigenous groups, and others. They together, they scoped kind of 4 big buckets of what we should be thinking about within people-centered clean energy transitions. So you can read them, but I'll just say the 4 buckets are decent jobs and worker protection, social and economic development, equity, social inclusion and fairness, and people as active participants, which I'll be talking about a little bit more today. And so these kind of concepts have really been mainstream throughout the agency. And so we've done a bunch of different kind of reports and analytic outputs looking at different kinds of ways that people-centered clean energy transitions are kind of seen throughout the energy sector. And so just a few examples here. We did a major report last year on affordability in clean energy transitions, which is something that I think probably all of us here on this webinar today know is really important, but it's often separated or kind of divorced from discussions around kind of technical clean energy discussions. So we really wanted to put it at the forefront. And then we had a big report on kind of key design considerations for affordable and clean energy transitions, which was really looking at these questions of policy design. So how do we design from the very beginning policies that really are putting people at the center? And so just to give an example of the affordability report that we did, what we wanted to do was to put into numbers some of what we know and what we talk about a lot around the disparities in energy affordability and energy use. So this is just an example from this report, but what we're showing here is that the poorest households in advanced economies spend nearly a quarter of their income on energy, even though they use half as much as the highest income households. And that's really a very it's really kind of shocking, actually, when you see it like this and when you're able to put numbers behind it. And in emerging market and developing economies, those disparities are even bigger. So we're really able to say, yes, we know that these are issues, but here's how big this disparity really is. And this is why it's so important that policymakers pay attention to it. And a big area that we focus on is on how to target policy design so that it really does impact the people who are most in need of taking advantage of those policies. So basically what we're saying there is, if you have a policy that, if you have a policy to, let's say, retrofit your home, and this is an example here on this slide, only people who are able to pay for that retrofit will be able to take advantage of the policy. So this is an example of what we call a modeled retrofit grant. So it means that this is how we would expect it to be. So this is a retrofit grant that doesn't target people by income. It just says, we'll give you this retrofit grant and you can use it on your home. So what we see is that in that case, the people with the highest income are the ones who are able to take advantage of that grant. So there's not fair distribution. It's just people who have money can make their houses more energy efficient. But what we say in our program and the data analysis that we're doing to back it up is to say, well, if you want people who are in lower income brackets to be able to take advantage of that grant, then you have to design your policy in a way that allows them to do that. And so here is an example of a retrofit grant from France, where they really did, at the center of their policy design, put into practice this idea of having lower income people be able to take advantage of it. And so all their policy design was really aimed at that objective. And what we see from this is that indeed, these people in the lower income and middle income brackets were able to take advantage of that grant. So it might seem obvious to people that if you design your grant in a way that lets people, lets a target group take advantage of it, you'll have better outcome. But you'd be surprised how often we see that governments are not thinking that way. And so therefore, we're really, again, trying to put the data behind that. Another place that we're doing a lot of work is around multiple benefits of different kinds of clean energy programs. So this is just a quick example to show that in New Zealand, there was a really high benefit to cost ratio of doing energy retrofits. So that's to say that when they did the energy retrofit, it wasn't just that they saw positive savings in terms of energy savings, but that they saw big savings in terms of health and well-being. And again, these are things that we may know, but it's really important to be able to put the data there and to say, when you do your energy retrofit in this way, not only will you see energy savings, but you'll see savings in terms of health and in terms of well-being. So taking these learnings, we have a new global commission on people-centered clean energy transitions this year. It is co-chaired by Teresa Ribera, who's the actually vice president for just transition at the European Union, and the Minister of Energy from Brazil. And then we have a number again of energy ministers from around the world. We actually have one labor minister who's from Nigeria. And then we have a whole commission of people representing different groups, as you can see here. And the commission is really focused this year on working within the G20 platform and then the COP platform to kind of bring these ideas around people-centered clean energy transitions into these multilateral fora. So I'm not sure how many of you have been following this, but last year under Brazil's G20 presidency, there were voluntary principles for just and inclusive transitions that were agreed upon. So here I have the 10 principles. They look pretty basic, but honestly, I was there. I can tell you that it was like multiple days and nights of these government officials like negotiating these principles. Everyone looked exhausted by the end of it. But I was really happy that we ended up with these 10 principles that are really pretty good. And so what our Global Commission is doing this year is we're building out each one of these principles with data and with case studies to really show why it's important for governments to be following these principles as they are doing their energy policy design. So, for example, why it's really important to be focusing on ending energy poverty as you're thinking about your clean energy transition, or sustainable inclusive economic growth for all. How can we, and Shalom, I know this is something you're focused on, how are we able to really think about this kind of economic growth, economic development as we are creating our policies. And so in this, what we're calling it our blueprint, we're working within our commission on, as I said, this data and analysis. So if any of you out there who are listening have good case studies or good data around these just and inclusive principles, please send them my way. We're really looking for good examples, and we're looking to also highlight cases that people may not know about, because what we really find to be true is governments are very interested in what's working in other places. Nobody really wants to reinvent the wheel. And I know there's a lot of good stuff going on, and especially in our kind of youth, youth out there, we know there's just a lot of innovation. And so I really would just ask again, if you have ideas about things, please send them my way so that we can share them. So finally, I'll just say, so for our blueprint, we're dividing it into we've divided these 10 principles into 3 kind of major buckets. So one is jobs and skills, one is fair distribution, affordability, and access, and one is on social inclusion and participation. And I'm going to give just a really quick example of each of these and then dive into why I'm really here. So this is an example of some data that we're looking for. So this is, and we're putting this under social inclusion and participation, but this is, it shows the progression of Indigenous ownership of renewable energy projects in Canada from 2000 to 2020. And what it shows is that the Canadian government, which was very focused on increasing Indigenous rights and Indigenous ownership of renewable energy projects and had a lot of policy that really focused on that, they've been able to really increase the Indigenous ownership and the kind of ownership schemes that include Indigenous ownership in Canada. And so this is an example of how we're trying to show with data that policy design, policy design really matters. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about why it's really important to engage people as active participants in clean energy transitions. And I'll say that this is a really interesting area because it's one where we know this to be true, and there's some data points. We know that engaging people is better, and we know it from our own experience. So I'll speak from my own experience. It's always much better to have consultations and to talk with people, but we find that it's actually quite difficult to access data points on this. So we have a few which are here, but it's another place I would just say, as you are all talking with people, it's a place where governments are asking for data. But we know that gaining this broad public support is really important for accelerating successful implementation of clean energy policies. And so that's both in terms of overall political support and also to build local acceptance of new projects. And we, at the kind of center of our program, we say that citizens and communities really should be active participants as decision makers, as innovators, and really importantly, as beneficiaries of clean energy actions. And so just a few data points here. So community-led renewable energy projects tend to have higher acceptance rates. Some European Commission studies show that 70% of citizens support renewable energy, but they want more involvement in decision-making around it. And then we've also seen that engaging citizens really increases their perception that it will benefit them and that there'll be fairness in the process. So just again to say that it's really important on all these different levels to engage citizens. And this isn't just true, I would say, for renewable energy or clean energy projects. This is true for like all development projects that there should be citizen engagement kind of across the board. So just a few quick examples. So this is a project called Solar Mamas, and it's from Zanzibar. And basically the idea around this project was to engage women in educating their other women and people in villages around electricity and to bring electricity to places where there had not been regular electricity access. And so 65 women were trained as solar technicians, which really kind of empowered them in their own place in their society, but also helped bring electricity to almost 2,000 homes. And so I know this is some work similar to what some people out there have been doing, just kind of thinking about, how can we really train our local citizens and how they can be ambassadors for some of this local electricity access work. But this is a really good example of where we've seen real progress. Now, a totally different example is a campaign in India called I Led the Way. And it is a campaign around energy efficient LED lighting. And so this campaign was actually really kind of a landmark, but the Indian government really wanted people to switch to LED bulbs. And so they started a campaign which distributed 10 million LED bulbs a month, but it brought citizens on board by having them be the ones who were kind of sharing this with others, and a few kind of innovative components to it. So for every 3 tweets of I Led the Way, another light bulb was donated to villages. So it really kind of brought people into trying to help their own villages, their own communities by raising awareness about the importance of these LED lights. So it's, completely different. The Zanzibar example is like very small scale. Here it's like this nationwide campaign, but both of them are really trying to engage citizens in a very kind of person-to-person way. And then the third example I wanted to bring up is just what we call citizens' assemblies. So we've seen citizens' assemblies in a few different contexts, but they can play this important role in kind of bringing citizens into dialogue with government officials and decision makers around climate change and energy transition. So we've seen these in Ireland, Denmark, and Austria. And it's basically bringing together a community of citizens to make recommendations or to bring some research, and then to actively participate in the in the kind of political process of bringing policy to bear. So, for example, France's Citizens Convention proposed new measures for emissions targets. In Canada, 380,000 people through this process were really engaged in shaping this policy. We saw some really interesting work here in Ireland as well. So it's actually really having a more direct impact into that kind of policy environment. So the other way that we're talking a lot about engaging people is through energy communities. And so energy communities can look really different in different places. I'm from the US, and there's kind of one way of looking at energy communities, which is not at all sort of agreed on. It looks different in Europe, it looks different, I think, in Africa, and everywhere, energy communities are different. But the things that they have in common is that they generally produce, manage, and share clean or renewable energy. And they do that at a lower cost. And I think that's really sort of the key, is it's thinking about the ways in which communities can work together to really to take advantage of the kind of clean energy opportunity. So a few examples here. So in the EU, there was new legislation on energy communities that came out in 2019. And under the EU law, energy communities can take a lot of different forms of different legal entities. So it can be a nonprofit organization, it could be a small company, it could be a cooperative. But they have to enable local groups to collaborate and invest in clean energy. So it's really trying to harness that the kind of buying power, the procurement power of a group in order to take advantage of clean energy. And so by acting as a single entity, they can participate in these energy markets and they can be more effective. So I think that's really kind of one of the key points of this. And that they gain access to the energy sector in a way more on par with these larger market players. So, rather than just individual households are able to come together as a group. And what we've seen is in Europe, based on this law, we've seen a huge number of these energy communities come to be just in the last few years. So you can see here in the Netherlands, there's a really significant amount, Denmark, UK, Austria, Switzerland, but really in many countries in Europe, they're seeing energy communities since this law came into being. So 3 kind of specific examples. So this example from Italy is one of the first renewable energy communities since this law was passed. And so it was organized by the municipality, the local municipality, and again, to bring together citizens in order to have this kind of buying and procurement power. And the idea was to help citizens become what they called prosumers. So both producers of renewable energy and also consumers of renewable energy. And so there was a real push to install solar panels on both public and private buildings to produce energy. And then surplus energy was either sold to the grid or shared with other building and community members. And then storing the excess energy was also a huge part of it. So they were able to store in batteries for later use. Now, of course, this required the municipality to be very organized as it was leading this. But what's interesting is that actually over the time, after 1 year, this shows that the average power that they produced was 25% higher than their demand. So they were really able to kind of, by being much more aware of what they were producing and what they were consuming, they were able to save more and produce more. So it's a really kind of good example and an interesting kind of way to think about this. So my next example, and maybe some of you have heard of Revolu Solar from Brazil. Shalom, I assume you're probably familiar with them, but maybe not. So unlike the last example, this is actually an example of a nonprofit organization, so pretty different. And it had a specific aim to support low-income households through these solar initiatives. And they've been working on this since 2015. So this example is the Favela Solar Cooperative, which was founded in 2021. And the way it works is that there was solar that was installed. And first of all, the solar that was installed, people in the community were trained to install the solar and to maintain it. So there's, job creation there, and there's, training that was had. So that's really important. And then through the energy that's generated, people received energy credits from their renewable energy consumption. And that was accumulated into their community fund. And so they were able to pay for the solar that they were using, but also the community fund was then dispersed as money for people in the community that they could use for other kind of basic services. But again, it was really critical that they're together in a community and not just kind of one-off. So this way they're able to really kind of pool their energy resources and kind of save that way. And then they also have children's workshops, which I just want to mention because I think it's really important to bring kids in kind of early to understand, the energy sector, to understand, what we're talking about when we talk about clean energy, why it's important to think about sustainability, and even why it's important to understand, some of this, some around the workforce. I think it's really important for them to understand, what solar is, what a solar developer does, what a solar installer does. So they had children's workshops around all that as well. Okay, so then the final example that I wanted to share is, again, a totally different example. So this is an ESCOM project from South Africa. So ESCOM being the utility in South Africa. So this was a solar mini grid project. So it's from the state-owned utility. And so this was in an eco village. So in the eco village, there's already there's already some of this kind of community infrastructure around renewable energy. But what they did here is they connected the community with a smart grid, which had energy storage, smart meters, and real-time monitoring. And what that enabled folks within the community to do was to basically ensure that energy that was being produced could that if one home needed more energy at a moment where another home didn't, that it could be dispersed in that way. So it allowed local control over their kind of community energy system. And so a local community member was trained to handle kind of the operations and the maintenance. And then there was a control system so that folks were able to kind of ensure that, everyone had access to the energy. And when some folks needed more, they were able to access it when some folks needed less. And there was also, as we said, storage here. So it's just another kind of model. And so really, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen if I can figure out how to do that. Let's see. Stop share. Okay, great. So, really what I want to to get across here is there's a lot of different ways to engage people in these clean energy transitions. And it's really important to think about, what are we trying to do with this engagement? Because it really matters how these different programs are designed. We get really different outcomes depending on what the objective of the design is. So if we're thinking about lower income communities, program design, whether it's a clean energy program or it's a community, it's energy community, it has to be designed in that way to really meet people where they are and bring them in. And so I think that goes across the board for all energy programs. But again, what we see is, really bringing people into the discussion, understanding, what people are, what their kind of specific objectives are is really important to have good policy design outcomes. So Shalom, I'm going to stop there and I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Jane. That was quite a lot. I was writing out all of the examples, and it's incredible to see so many initiatives happening around different countries and how they are actively engaging their citizens. And maybe just to kick it off with the questions, we have about 2-3 minutes for questions, then I'll introduce Dr. BinBin. But I do have a question because you mentioned affordability and how policies influence affordability. So I was curious to understand, like, how do governments then manage, drive the cost of electricity? Is it going to be the citizens mentioning or saying something about the cost, or will the government in itself lower the cost for energy to be much more accessible to its citizens?
So thanks for that. Great question. So, affordability is one of the biggest issues in energy, kind of across the board, clean energy, traditional energy. But there's a lot of different ways to address it. So, for example, something that we work on a lot at the IEA is energy efficiency, because really the less energy that you use, the less you pay. But a lot of times people either don't have access to energy efficient appliances, or they think that energy efficient appliances are going to be more expensive. So a lot of the work that we're doing here is to show both governments and consumers that energy efficient appliances can be huge in terms of cost savings, especially over the lifetime of an appliance. Now, to your question though, and this is what I was kind of trying to get at in the presentation, a lot of times the upfront cost of an energy efficient appliance can be more than a low income household can afford. So even if those appliances are coming down in cost, for a family that's looking at, two appliances, 2 refrigerators, the one that has higher energy efficiency might be slightly more expensive. So that's when we think about, okay, how can government policy help with that upfront cost? There's innovative ways of paying for something like that. For example, there's utility programs, there's government programs, there's a lot of different ways that the market can help structure that kind of payment so that it is accessible to lower income households. And once those households have those energy efficient appliances, we see just really normally a much lower kind of monthly cost. So that's one thing I would just say is I think energy efficiency, and it's not just in appliances, we see it energy retrofits in homes, et cetera. It's really important to try to increase kind of energy efficiency across the board. But then in terms of, you said, Shalom, what about the cost of energy? So there's certainly a lot of work being done in terms of tariffs and tariff structures, and, what is the best way for, tariffs to be designed in order to ensure affordability. I think we're seeing some different and interesting and innovative ways that different tariffs are being designed. So, for example, Brazil is a really interesting case of this. So Brazil has actually very high coverage of electricity. And one of the ways that they've had a very intentional program for, I think, like 20 years. And one of the really important components of that has been a social tariff. So they've had a lower tariff for people in this program so that they were able to have more affordable electricity. So this is a lot of the work that we're doing. I just gave kind of 2 examples, but one thing I will say is one of the big findings from our affordability report that we did last year is that on the whole, our energy system, so like the global energy system, is more affordable as a clean energy system. So as we move to clean energy, the whole system becomes more affordable over time. But the challenge then is when we could say, okay, if we zoomed out to 2040, we would see that the whole system is more affordable. But how do we get there? And it's those upfront costs that that governments really need to work on together with industry and others in order to ensure that we can get to that point where the whole system is more affordable for everyone.
That's true. Yeah, I do agree with that as well because we see the costs coming down in different countries. Some countries already recording very low cost of electricity, but it's really about the upfront cost. How can we get everyone to move at the same time and be able to achieve the net zero target? I have one hand raised up. This is from Enoch. Just this question, and we'll let you move on to your next meeting. Enoch, go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Shalom. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you, Jane, for that wonderful presentation. So 2 questions. First is, from your experience, what policies or incentives have been most effective in encouraging citizen participation in the energy transition? And then the next question is, seeing the kind of work that is being undertaken at the International Energy Agency, I think I envision that there is a large amount of data that is being processed in order to, provide those policy recommendations and things like that. So my question is, what are some of the internship opportunities, maybe for undergraduate students who want to do data analysis with IEA? What are like the requirements for that? Thank you.
Well, thanks for your question. So I think, I heard that your first question is what are some of the kind of incentives to help encourage participation from citizens in clean energy? Was that right?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I mean, I'd be curious what others on this call think, because I'm sure there's a lot of expertise on here. So, I'd really be, and Shalom, before I jump off, I'd love to hear from others too. But I think, one of the most important things is that when people participate, that they see that their participation matters and that they see results. And so this is why we often, talk about not having what we would say is like a box check exercise. So like participation that's not real, that's not meaningful. Because what we've seen is that when there is really meaningful participation, and this is what I was getting to at the beginning, that there are just better outcomes for citizens. So for example, one way that we can see this is in community benefit agreements and community benefit sharing. So this is probably not so much in the African context, but maybe I'm curious if this is something that you've come across. But in certainly, for example, in the US, and I know in some European countries, and in some European countries this is mandated by law, is that when that one of the ways that the community participation manifests is through community benefit agreements. So that's basically where, the community is negotiating with a renewable developer or, some other entity that is developing in their community about what kinds of benefits, what kinds of tangible benefits that community will get. And so I think just to go back to your question, the way I think to bring people in is to have a process that really values their input. I think in a lot of places, there's not a lot of like trust, and we don't have perfect processes. We have more bad ones than good ones, I would say, overall. But there are a lot of people now who are working on this and trying to kind of change the norm, so that the norm is that there is a real participatory process. And it's partially too about people demanding it and asking for it. And I think that's why these kinds of groups are really useful, because we're able to say it is possible. So how can we support that to help see this become, again, sort of the norm across different places. But I'd love to hear others answer that question. But really quickly, let me just say on the internships, I think so. Generally at the IEA, we do take graduate interns. We don't usually do undergraduate interns. And you should look at our website or our LinkedIn, where we usually advertise our internships. But you can also email me directly, and I'm happy to talk to you and see, and just see what info I can give you. So feel free to reach out to me, and I would be more than happy to talk with anyone on this call. But Shalom, can we just open that question though to others about kind of what you think is useful in terms of encouraging people to participate?
Definitely. I was going to ask Dr. BinBin to share some insight, because a lot of what you have said, some of the conversations I've had with her, you reiterated some of this, and you even touched on the EU perspective. So, and she's working in the Netherlands, and she has a lot of expertise on that. So, Dr. BinBin, please share with us.
Yeah, I can quickly say something now. Can you hear me? That I can.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I guess some of my presentation is about addressing some of those issues. But Enoch, if I understand correctly, it's specifically about what policies that are in place which do actively support citizen participation. So in the EU, there are a number of directives in recent years revamped, a number of them, which have explicitly put citizenship and citizen agency rights and responsibilities as a part of the energy transition. So what you see in policy is not direct obligations, let's say, that citizens must do X in order to get Y, but they, let's say it's a progression and evolution in the expectations of how much citizens what role they should play. So it's a bit tricky in the sense that, so there is no legal implications when citizens are not engaged in specific ways in the energy transition. However, in the language of the EU, there's also expectations that local governments would in fact do some of that because it's in the language of the EU. But given tensions between EU and member states, how that's put into practice, that's the reason why there's a huge diversity of reactions to that. But the mouthpiece of the EU clearly indicates a movement towards explicitly giving citizens more agency. So it's not a black or white answer, but okay, so that's one set of answers. The other set of answers is it actually comes to the different types of incentives and the removal of regulatory barriers for setting up energy communities or citizen energy initiatives in different countries. And that really is different from country to country. For example, I can just say that in the Netherlands, for example, there was a new legal entity that was established recently called thermal communities. And the whole creation of that legal status was to remove barriers at the regional level for heating. So heating transition, to motivate heating transition to happen a little bit more quickly. So that's not only energy communities, but specifically energy communities that focus on heating transitions would get the fast track on a number of agreements with local governments and subsidies, et cetera. So but that's very, very different depending on where you go. It's quite local how regional authorities react to certain, let's say, directives by the EU. So I know that, One more thing I want to say, the EU itself has in recent years started a, I would call it a research group. It's sort of like the Joint Research Center, but the equivalent on citizen participation and engagement. So what they try to be is a knowledge hub on best practices in the EU and related to citizen engagement in energy and also other sustainable transitions. And they want to act as a knowledge hub for EU projects and also governments in order to enable governments not to reinvent the wheel and to learn from other cities what are best practices. Again, that's not a legal thing. It's not an actual policy, but they are supports in place to better enable local governments to do their thing. And here's a rub. I mean, a lot of this falls on the shoulders of local governments. So that is a big barrier in terms of, all right, you have these big cities with a lot of money. They're able to do a lot on, citizen engagement and things and have resources. But most of where EU lives, these middle-sized cities do not have extra resources to do citizen engagement. So there's, even when governments want to, it doesn't mean they can. So that's really where a lot of the barriers are right now, just practical implementation. So I'll speak a little bit more about that in the presentation, hopefully. But also, if I don't address that, just we can have a conversation afterwards. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. BinBin. I already knew that you had a lot to uncover for us when it comes to the EU's regulations and policies around citizenship engagement. And I'm already very excited to get into your section, but I wanted to say thank you to Jane once again. I know that this is a huge sacrifice from the side of the IEA, and I greatly appreciate your time to join us on this call. So please, like she mentioned during her presentation, if there are best case scenarios or practices that you have seen that has worked on different countries, maybe as a researcher, feel free to share with her. And she also mentioned that I think Enoch, you could also feel free to reach out to her about the ideas on how to go about undergraduate engagement. And thank you so much, Jane. You can stay with us if you can, but I know that you have other engagement, but thank you so much, and I will be in touch.
Thank you so much. And let me just say again, I would love I think everybody here has like a really useful perspective, and we'd love to hear from you. So please feel free to reach out. BinBin, you as well. I'd be, very interested to talk with you too. So let's be in touch. And Shalom, thank you so much. I can stay on for the first 6 minutes, so I can't wait. So I'm just going to sit here and be quiet.
Thank you so much. I will just quickly just quickly introduce Dr. BinBin. She has a lot of experiences.
Oh my gosh, Shalom, please don't read everything. Just read the first line. Just read the first line.
I won't.
I didn't know you were going to read this out. Sorry.
I wanted to let everyone know how amazing you are, and some of the works that I've been privileged to do with Dr. BinBin. So permit me to just read a bit about her, and she's going to go ahead to make a presentation. Dr. BinBin is an assistant professor for transdisciplinary design and implementation at the Delft University of Technology and the Faculty of Technology Policy and Management based in the Netherlands. She's also the co-lead PI of the Horizon Europe project Just Reach, which is a just climate resilience through enhanced adaptation and capacity harnessing, working with local and regional authorities to align regional innovation and climate adaptation goals. She was also the coordinator of the Horizon 2020 project include Energy Citizens for Inclusive Decarbonization, which aims to operationalize the concept of energy citizenship in order to contribute to the goals of the energy transition. It's my warm, it's my incredible pleasure to welcome Dr. BinBin for her presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shalom. Very generous intro. Let me see if I can share my, are you able to see my slides?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you so much. And it was also, I just want to say, great pleasure to listen to Jane. I think I learned a lot from her presentation as well. Hopefully you'll see the linkages between what she said and what I say. I think there's some interesting differences as well in terms of the scale at which the IEA collects their data and the scale that they work on, and maybe some of the projects that I work on. So, I mean, I want to start the presentation with some basic assumptions that we can just put on the table, because I find that that's useful, because I don't know where all of you are from or what your thoughts are about the energy transition. But let's just get it out all there. Okay, so there's a core paradox in why we're talking about people when it comes to the energy systems, right? There's a core paradox because energy systems are big, they're complex, they seem to be controlled by governments and utilities. In many places, they are centrally controlled by technical experts. Citizens, to be honest, usually just seem to be passive consumers of energy. And depending on where you live, people have really few choices when it comes to which fuels they can access and how it comes to them. So somebody might ask, maybe not you, but some people might ask, all right, that's the case. I mean, that's the way the world is. What do citizens have to do with this? And I would then say, well, I think we could just accept the way that this energy system is mostly structured now if we were satisfied with the way that the energy system works in the world, right? I mean, if we're happy with the way things are. But the fact is the energy system is in need of transformation, because the energy sector makes up for 65 to 75% of the carbon emissions, which need to be cut in order to avoid extreme climate impacts. And there are also grave inequalities, as Jane has pointed out, in the degree of access to clean energy at affordable prices around the world in many different countries. So the transformation that's needed, and that's often referred to as the energy transition, really requires us to consider and identify fundamentally what might need to be changed, why and how that has to be changed. And then you might ask again, all right, that's fine, I'm on board, we do need change, etc. But why talk about citizens? Can't we just change the policies? Can't we just change the systems? And you might be asking, aren't energy systems run by those with power? Don't their behaviors reflect market forces far beyond the control of any regular individual on the street? And shouldn't it be those who have the power to control and change those systems from the top down be the ones to do something? What does this have to do with the men and women on the street who need to make a living, to make ends meet, with their own worries and concerns? So all of those are valid concerns, and I'm just here to provide an alternative perspective to that of why citizens need to be involved, beyond being passive consumers, beyond being users of what has been built for them. And this alternative perspective is what I'm calling energy citizenship. So this term that I'm going to be sort of using over and over again, this is sort of the background of it. And just to let you know, my background, I'm actually in a policy analysis, group, but I come from a background of doing what is called transdisciplinary research. So from that background, I really have come from understanding collaborative group processes, how small groups or groups of people and organizations really come to consensus about what the problem actually is and how do they go forward in solving complex issues. So it's both this policy background and this concern about collaborative problem solving processes that I'm sort of arriving in all of these topics in the energy transition and transformation. And a lot of what I know, what I'm sharing with you, is as a part of the Include project that Shalom has already shared with you, which was an EU project really focused on defining, operationalizing, and mobilizing this concept of energy citizenship. So here's a long definition, and this definition also took a long time, because it was the agreed upon definition of what this term is from across 4 EU projects, and all 4 projects involving, I would say, more than 100 researchers. We're a wordy bunch, so this is the only one that we could agree on. But what I want to summarize with this statement is just that energy citizenship is simply a lens through which he can better understand our rights and responsibilities to a just and inclusive sustainable energy system. And key here is the balance between right and responsibilities, to reframe what are our rights and what are our responsibilities in relation to the energy transition, to the energy system. So that's kind of a basic definition. Don't worry, this can blow past you. It's okay. The rest of the presentation, I'll come back to some more concrete definitions of energy citizenship. And the next two slides, what I want to set up is trying to talk about the need for energy citizenship, right? I mean, Jane has already talked to you a lot about this, but I'll give it a slightly different spin, which is from the perspective of what have our targets been? How have we progressed on the targets? And what are the barriers to that progression, to see how energy citizenship fits into that? So this is probably very familiar to most of you, which is, well, these targets that we have in terms of the SDG 7, in terms of the 4A framework of ensuring access, availability, affordability, and acceptability of clean energy. And also at the same time in parallel, very much related but separate, is this net zero emission by 2050 target, right? The EU has signed the Green Deal. This is what everybody is aiming for. A lot of the COP discussions, all of this. This is the background. You know this, these are the targets. Maybe much, well, for me, very interesting is how have we progressed on it as a starting point for what we need, right? Overall, I mean, this is probably very familiar to some of you as well. We're not on track necessarily. I mean, there's been a lot of progress, but we're not necessarily on track for some of the goals that have been set up by the SDGs, namely to achieve universal access to clean cooking by 2030. And also this key metric, I'm using a lot of IEA resources, by the way, which is the tripling of renewable capacity. What we're projected to reach is 2.7. What we need is full 3 by 2030. So there's also this idea of what I think is really interesting, the changing percentage of the final energy consumption from renewable energies. This is actually, for me, a more worrying number, right? In 2021, it was 18%. So the share of renewables in the final energy consumption, 2% increase by 2030. So as we're increasing the renewable energy, the renewable capacity, this means we're also just consuming more energy increasingly. So the final share has not really changed that much. So these are some of the ideas. Basically, what we're saying is there's progress, but maybe not enough. Even in a place like the EU, I give you sort of a sub list of barriers to the EU possibly not meeting its targets by 2050. And this is from the Environmental Bureau of Europe itself. So there's still a reliance on fossil fuels for heating. That's going to be much more difficult to change than electricity use. There's a lack of support for new technologies for heating. So that's related to the first point. The high amount of energy taxation already going on means that there's huge blowback from industry and community and companies, which are the base of taxes for the EU. And this is especially true in the Netherlands. Communities are largely excluded from real participation. So remember what Jane was saying about meaningful participation. Yeah, that's not happening. That's really not happening. And that is the case for a number of reasons, some of which I mentioned earlier, but different capacities of local government whose it falls on to do this real participation when they haven't been trained to do it. The participation fatigue, so people not really wanting to be involved in it. So a lot of practical barriers there. And also, even when households are wanting to make changes, for example, to the source of electricity that they are connected to or to the heat, they're denied connections to the grid. So these are just an example, right? This is not, these are not barriers everywhere to all energy transition issues, but from the EU perspective, I'm just giving you a flavor of the implementation gaps that are there that it seems immovable at the moment. What do we do with these barriers? To further highlight these barriers from the citizens' point of view. So we really we had an exercise in which we connected all the findings from surveys, of tens of thousands of people from these four projects I mentioned to you earlier. We try to pull it together into a policy brief. It's available at the link there. I can share this presentation with Shalom, so you can access it later. But we got behind the narrative of the people we're interviewing and surveying to try to understand what's stopping people from either cooperating with policymakers on energy transition policies, what doubts they had, why are they skeptical about what the progress has been, and also trying to understand local governments. What are the challenges for getting people more involved and to have a different view of the different share of rights and responsibilities that people should have? And it came down to really three concerns embodied in these three questions. And these three concerns are the following. The first is a fairness question, and that also relates to a lot of the facts that Jane shared with you. Why should I be the one to change, right? This relates to her graphs about how the people who have a lot are the ones who benefit from the further changes in the energy transition. So there was a perception of a lack of fairness in any of the energy transition policies, regardless of the talk about just transitions. People just didn't buy it. Secondly, the second skepticism that they have is, why should I trust what you're telling me? This is a matter of institutional trust. So the issue is, you can tell me that all your policies are based on evidence and data, but guess what? I don't trust that. I don't trust how you derive the conclusions, or sometimes people don't trust where the data comes from. And there's a distrust of science, by the way, that cannot be discounted. So there's a fundamental trust issue. By the way, this is in the EU, where institutions work somewhat well. So even under those conditions, there's a lack of trust in what institutions actually are trying to do and why they're trying to do it. That's just reality. And then the last question that they have is, okay, do I actually have the capacity to do what you tell me to do? So let's say I do think I should do something because I don't care about the fairness issue, or I think I should do something. And let's say I also believe I trust you as an institution. Like, you tell me I should do something, I believe you have my best interest in mind. I want to follow those policies. But then even on those conditions, there's a third concern, which is, but you tell me to do something, I don't have the skills, or I don't have the time, or I don't have the capacity. You tell me to do things that I simply can't not do. I don't have the support, I don't have the money, I don't have the time, I don't have the X, right? So you're not putting me in a position that would allow me to actually do the things you're asking me to do, even if I know you have my best intentions. You have the best intentions and my best interests at heart. So those are three tricky barriers that we have to overcome for energy citizenship to be real and not just a word we're using to seem like we want people to be on board. And this is really crucial to sort of tackle if we want to move forward. So here are just what I'm presenting here is our definition of what energy citizenship is through a bottom-up perspective. And the key thing here is that a fundamental outcome of our research is that we realize that energy citizenship, a lot of times when we talk about participation from people, we basically assume that in order to be an energy citizen or to have meaningful participation in these processes, you got to have some money. You got to have some money. Your participation is what you're able to give so that you can get something back. And that means a large part of people who are living and dependent and a part of the energy system are excluded. So we wanted to, with our expressions of energy citizenship, just lay out all the different groups of people who have a role in the energy system, even if it's about them being the ones who are dispossessed or who are energy poor or who are excluded, as a part of the whole ecosystem of people who have a right to energy. And through this definition, we want to say that, instead of looking at energy only as a commodity, right, something to be traded, something to be efficient about, that energy itself could be seen as a right in order for real development to happen and in order for real equity to be made a reality, that energy should be seen as a right. And so part of what we're saying in energy citizenship is taking the citizenship part of it seriously, which is reframing the energy transition from this perspective that energy is a right. And so, for example, there are energy citizens who require access to energy, even though they may not have time or resources to pay for it adequately. But their experiences are required in order to identify what can be improved in the system, right? They have a part to play when their experiences can be shared and learned from, and when solutions are developed in order to improve access, availability, and affordability of energy. So there's a role for energy citizenship there. There's also, which is more normally thought of as energy citizenship, when we talk about prosumerism. That's something that Jane has already mentioned. So that one becomes involved in the production of energy from a decentralized point of view. That means you invest in energy, small scale off-grid systems, or you invest in community energy. A lot of the energy communities that Jane talked about would fall under this energy production vein of energy citizenship. And then there's also the more traditional type of energy citizenship that falls into energy consumption. This relates a lot to, for example, energy efficiency. That's also what a lot of Jane was talking about. So with different ways in which you could tune or make or improve the way that you consume energy such that you could do the most for energy efficiency. It also relates to being, for example, an energy champion or energy role model for your community, and demonstrating your own behavioral practices in order for other people to follow along. And then finally, something that is also what we believe is a certain expression of energy citizenship, which is maybe not really usually discussed in the sort of context of energy transition, is political governance, which is what we're listing here: people, citizens who litigate, citizens who challenge, existing policies, who are activists. And this political route of action is another expression of what we're saying can be how people use to make their voices heard in the energy transition. So you can find all examples of these examples of energy citizenship and these definitions in this portal, that this web link that I've put on this particular slide. We've amassed the research findings of different projects on energy citizenship to be put on a map in this portal, so that you can see and look for examples of where energy citizenship has been expressed. Unfortunately, right now, our examples are across EU, which means we don't have anything in Africa or in other contexts outside of the EU. But perhaps you'll also be able to see some linkages with the challenges you're meeting with what's being done in Europe. And here are some further examples of energy citizenship from where I live. I'm originally from the US. I was born in China, but now I've been living in the Netherlands. And these are very, very interesting examples of energy citizenship, which also address the barriers that I mentioned to you earlier, and also the challenges. Remember the 3 questions? So these are to meet these questions. These are organizations who have really thought in a very clever way for overcoming how to get across how to earn trust from energy citizens. One of these organizations is called Boerkracht. So they are an NGO. They've been around for 20 years. Their whole insight that they work from is that citizens do need catalysts to get started on these kind of energy transition projects. Municipalities have the same goals, but municipalities and communities don't really talk to each other in the way that they need to talk to each other, because there's a distance and there's a lack of trust, just simply because one is representing a government and the other representing communities. So Boerkracht is what they call a middle actor. It is a middle actor whose sole goal is to build the relationship between the municipalities and the policymakers and individual neighborhoods. They work on a neighborhood level, not even on a citywide level, just a very small neighborhood. What they do is they have a support staff that who is an expert on conversations and facilitation. He or she goes into one neighborhood and identifies the active person, you know what I mean? Like the really busy person who can do, like the superwoman or the superman. Everybody knows them. Everybody talks about them. They're involved in everything. They go in and they identify that influential person that they call a strong shoulders. Then they build a neighborhood team around the strong shoulders. So you get immediate buy-in of the community because you've identified the person that everybody trusts already. And then you build the structure around this. So you see what I mean is middle actor, it's not bottom up, it's not top down, it's both. Because the municipalities are acting on policy decisions at the higher level. Those are the policies that the IEA is involved in designing, right? But then they bring up the people who have their own values, they have their own what they care about in their everyday lives. And they're trying to find a match between the everyday concerns of people in their lives with this policy out of nowhere, right? And they're trying to find an overlap. And Boerkracht is an organization that has done it, I think, incredibly well and in a very smart way. And this is just an example of the energy communities initiatives in Netherlands. I think what they do very well is in the Netherlands, they build umbrella organizations in order to build on the capacity and know-how of individual energy communities. So what we notice in our research, for example, is that energy communities vary very much in their success rates, how long they're around for. Not all energy communities are great, right? I mean, just to be honest, they're not all high quality energy communities. So in the Netherlands, what is done, there are several levels of support systems for energy communities that are funded by the city and funded by national governments. So you have, for example, in the city where I'm from, Rotterdam, they have a cooperation of the energy communities. So energy communities can learn from each other and they get funding and they get support. And then the energy from Rotterdam is a part of an even bigger umbrella organization called Energie Samen, which is a national level umbrella organization building that connects all of those city organizations of energy cooperations. So you see, it's actually, I wouldn't call it bureaucratic, but it's different levels of support. What I call that is an ecosystem of support that addresses the capacity issue that I mentioned earlier, right? Rather than the fairness or the trust issue, it builds on the capacity issue. Boerkracht builds on the trust issue and also the fairness issue, right? So you see, what I'm trying to give you are examples of how successful organizations really get to the heart of the three main doubts that people have for getting on board for an energy transition. And you might be asking, and I think it's a fair question, all right, fine. But those are in places where there's institutions in place, there's rule of law, democracy works. That's not the case where I'm from. So I like to share with you also an example from North Macedonia in a small village called Belica, where there is also, I'm talking about zero institutional support. In fact, the government is not very, I mean, they're a bit negative on what they're trying to do, although not actively getting in the way, but there are just no subsidies, no incentives, no nothing. And in this case, they have also managed to raise a lot of funds and money to work outside the institutional support system because they've managed to align what they've trying to do with a lot of values and goals of their communities. So for example, so this is an energy community, but they don't sell it as an energy community. They attract, so they've chosen this, the man in the middle, his goal is actually to revive traditional culture and arts and crafts in his hometown. That's his goal. And he's able to attract a lot of people of his generation, of, you know, people also with means who share the same vision. And he says, okay, if we're going to do this, we have to attract young people. And to attract young people, we need to seem innovative and we need to provide a good living sort of environment for them. And we're going to do this through the lens of energy community. So you see, they instrumentalize the whole notion of energy community in order to do what they want to do, which is to build community, period. They're very successful without any institutional support or help from the government in any level. And it's because they were very smart to identify, what do people care about? How do we align the goals of an energy transition with those values, which on the surface don't seem like they align at all, but they do. So that's another example. And just further here on the left, what you see is the portal that I mentioned earlier. So that's just to reemphasize that. And then also, how do we then further work with these expressions of energy citizenship? And we also zero in on sort of what individuals are able to do in order to express their potential in making change. And we do this through this guide that we've created using that we shared at COP. And that's also, Shalom knows a lot about this. This is where we worked with the UN Youth for Capacity to promote this as a means for young people to start making change right away. And it's just a workbook. It's a series of activities and ways of thinking that gets you started on creating change where you are in your own community. And it's based on design thinking for systems transformation methodology. We've taught this methodology to, over 1,800 students in the West, in Europe. But we think there's a lot of potential for doing this further. And I can tell you more about that if you would like to hear more. And as a result of running an Include Academy online, we see that this works in some ways, right? It's not a huge amount of change that we're creating, but we were able to, for example, Shalom was part of this, you see her there, able to stimulate the creation of 8 different projects on the ground, and we were able to fund 2 of them. And these are all very local projects on the ground, but all making, right now, the 2 projects making quite a big local impact in terms of, for example, how do you implement a biogas facility near agricultural areas? So these things, we've translated this kind of abstract conceptual thinking to, okay, but what do we do for our own communities? And so the whole approach to this way of thinking, of doing the things that Borchak does, of doing the things that the man in Belize does, is working from valuing your own experience, knowledge, and perspective, really valuing it, not just giving it, just paying it just a minor attention, but really believing that your own experience, knowledge, and perspective is key to contributing to the energy transition in your own particular way. Then, after that, finding an actionable problem to solve based on your own experience, knowledge, and perspective. Right? And this is what the methodology is about, but finding an actionable problem. So it's not going to be everything, and it's going to be small, but it's somewhere. And then just to be patient and then try again. That's the whole thing of the approach that we want. So what I've talked to you about is what happens on system level, what happens, on sort of the community level, but ultimately what we realize is that the energy transition really begins with individuals and what they believe and what they value. And and ultimately it's a belief that what you do matters, right? That's the whole thing. If you didn't believe what you do matters, then why would you do anything? So this is what we call the belief in your self-efficacy, in your collective efficacy. And if you have that belief, you can move mountains. That's just, what we are as humans. I'd like to end on this. I hope I'm not being too presumptuous, but I came across this article and I felt like I would like to share this with you. This is a story that came out of The Economist very recently. And it talked about how Africa is the great hope of the whole world because it will have the biggest share of all the young people in the whole world. And what tremendous potential there is solely because of that fact. But it also mentioned that it's a critical time because a lot of the lack of institutions, the lack of trust in even democracy itself, the lack of rule of law was impacting the way that young people were going to be reacting to the need for change. And they termed this generation, the generation now that are in their teens, 20s, Generation Hustle, because they have been so accustomed to making things work without help from companies hiring them, from organizations hiring them. People are starting, they're very entrepreneurial. They have really good ideas and they have so much to give. But they're also at the cusp of disbelief, at the cusp of giving up, at the cusp of throwing their hands in the air because the institutions and systems just don't work. So what do they do? So I think, if I may, I can link our methodology to this, which is that how to keep holding on or how to keep contributing when all facts that you face is that there's resistance to what you're trying to do, right? And this belief in your own efficacy, and that home is where the start is where energy can be found in going forwards with the energy transition. And I would argue people-centered energy transition starts with the belief that you care about your home, you can affect your home, and that's why you're going to do something. I think that's at the heart of what we're talking about, actually, when we're talking about change and these big words about transformation. It's really this. So thanks for listening. If you want more information about the playbook, there's a QR code. Here's my email address. Yeah, and also please feel free to just get in touch directly. I will give the floor over to Shalom now. I'll leave the screen up a little bit longer just in case you need time. But thank you very much for the time and opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dr. BinBin. I loved the closing presentation because a lot of us here are Africans, and I felt like we were encouraged to not give up on initiatives. Me from Nigeria, some of our people, some of the participants here are from Uganda, Ethiopia, and different parts of Africa, and it's reassuring to see that Africa is still placed at the center of change and driving transformative solutions to problems. And I think one way to make this also more special, because I know you love engagement from people. So I would leave it first open to the participants. I mean, if you can turn on your camera or you have a question directly for Dr. BinBin, please feel free to raise your hand, turn on your camera so that we could have a discussion before we end the section. But I do see a question in the chat box, and this is from a researcher in the UK, Mr. Excel. He said that his research interest lies around energy justice, particularly in the global south, and he would like to understand from your own perspective where energy citizenship sits in the energy justice framework. And I think this is quite a crucial question. And he also asked, are there any plans to target this research around regions like Africa and Asia, knowing that these regions are more than crucial for the just transition? Completely aligning with your closing remarks here.
Yes, yes. Great questions. Thank you for your question, Excel. So the first question, where energy citizenship sits in the energy justice framework. I think, in the book, there was a book linked to a book I think I put in the presentation, but in that book, the point that we made is seeing so we see energy justice as a goal. If we see energy justice as a goal, and we might be able to see energy citizenship as a means. And so one way of connecting the two is whether or not these ways of thinking about energy citizenship could get us closer to certain aspects of the energy justice framework. So for example, we notice a lot of the talk about energy justice in policies have to do with distributional effects, right? How do we distribute that was also a lot of the current policy debates. However, if we take energy citizenship seriously, then we would be able to put more attention on the procedural aspects and perhaps also representational aspects of justice. So I think it helps to flesh out operationally different aspects of the energy justice framework that are now only partially operationalized, if that makes sense. I hope that answers your question, Excel. And then I will then go on to the next part, plans to target research. Sorry?
Go ahead. I wanted to read it if you.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I could read it. Yeah. And the second question being research targeting regions in Africa and Asia. Unfortunately, I myself, I don't have any near plans to do research in Africa and in Asia. However, at our university, Delft, there's an initiative called the Delft Global Initiative. And there, researchers have done a lot of work on clean cooking fuels. And also, I know that there are other projects in the EU focused on the African continent, but I'm just personally not connected to those. However, what might be connected to that, not from a research perspective, from an educational perspective, we are going to be designing a MOOC with the UN for to further elaborate these issues of energy citizenship and transformation. And in that MOOC, we would like to collect also more case studies and understanding, and maybe as a part of it, more research to understand what is actually happening, because we would like our audience to be global for that particular MOOC. We're just starting the development now, so it'll probably take us a year and a half to really launch it, because we work slowly here in Europe, sorry, much slower than other parts of the world. So that's what I can say for now. But I mean, I think this changes very quickly. And if any of you have interests or ideas for research proposals, you please get in touch with me, and I can perhaps try to put my ears on the ground, and try to connect you with people who would be interested in doing research like that. For example, I have a colleague who works in Indonesia primarily, and he does a lot of energy transition things in Indonesia. A lot of these things are luck. Who happens to be gotten funding at the right time that you're also looking for a position. So, just keep trying, and then you can let me know and it really helps if you have a clear vision for what you want to do research on. One more word about that. I often find it's quite difficult if we receive emails from students from abroad and they say, do you have a position for me in your lab? That you will almost 99.9% of the time get a negative answer or no answer at all, because they don't know if you're serious, because you don't have an idea. The onus on you being from outside of the West is that what makes up for our lack of understanding is you showing why you want to do it and what you want to do. It's a double standard. It's a double standard, but I'm going to tell you right now that is so. And also in the West, this is an advantage. We're not as hierarchical. Like, we're also looking for ideas from people who understand the problem. We know who understand the problem better than we do. We're looking for that. And so you're a real treasure if you can provide that perspective. And we can't. And so that's just let's say a strategy for when you're sending emails. Please have a clear idea of what you want to do research on and why. That's a general thing rather than the specific thing. Yeah.
That's very informative, because I know some of the people here are students looking towards graduate opportunities. So that important key about identifying the areas where you want to work in and stating it clearly in the email, that is something that I believe would be a key takeaway for anyone that has joined the section. Excel, I just wanted to talk a little bit about him because he does a lot of research. He finishes the master's in I think it's on climate change, and he had done a lot of interviews with people talking about energy transition and all of that. So, and he's also starting a research lab for Africans, and that is why I wanted. I found it also amazing, because we've not had a lot of research institutions solely for people that really want to do this research. So I believe it's something that he can share with you, and we'll see how that can go on from here. I do see another question in the chat, but I'm going to call Andrew because I would like him to ask this question directly. He's someone that has started following some of our webinars, and I love his enthusiasm as well. So Andrew, if you're in a place where you can speak, feel free to ask your question directly.
Okay, please, can I do that without the camera?
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof, for the presentation. Well, you said something that resonated within me, and that is energy is a right. How do we drive this perspective and make our voices heard in a community that is underserved and unserved?
That's such a good question. I think our perspective, the book that we wrote about centered around this idea. We wrote it because we knew it was not expressed anywhere else, actually. And I think we wrote as a first step, but I think as a next step, it's very difficult because the way that the markets are organized, the way that the energy market is organized, and the way economy is organized, we can say all we want to about energy as a right, but the reality is it's treated like a commodity, right? So when we say the energy is a right, we're questioning no less than the way that the capital markets are organized today. The way that I then practically use it, because I do not believe in tearing things down and breaking them without an alternative, or I just don't, that's my personal perspective on life. I think destroying things is not the way to go, but to provide an alternative, right? And so what would be the alternative? And the alternative would be to act and do with ourselves and our environment as if energy were right. Because how does that look like? It's so radical that actually it's hard to imagine. So let's translate this to something practical. If energy is a right, and we express this initially, then the policies we support or the actions we support, we should express in our presentations, in our starting points. First of all, before I start anything that I present, I'd like to present this counter perspective on energy. Energy is a right. If you, in all of your presentations, in all of your engagements, in all of your, I'm sure all of you are so illustrious in the activities that you take part, and you simply share that perspective, who knows? It might trigger somebody else to think that way as well. And you might realize that more people actually think that makes more sense than energy as a commodity. But it takes, I think, the first step to make explicit. That is what we need to shift our beliefs in order to actually fundamentally change the energy system. So it takes speaking out initially, I think. That's a simple getaway answer, I think. But I do think I don't underestimate the power of making explicit implicit beliefs or tacit beliefs. Make it clear, make it explicit, and see what happens.
Wow.
Thank you so much, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think I'm having an idea to start off something to push this. Thank you so much, man.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I also want to ask, in your presentation slide, I saw something like the Change Makers Guide to Energy
Yes.
Transition. Yeah, is it available digitally for free?
Yes,
or...
it is.
Okay.
It is.
Okay.
It's online. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just going to...
I will share. Shalom, should I share with you the slide deck, and then you can share with everybody? All the links are in the slide deck. Yeah.
Oh.
I'll share that with them as soon as we're done with this presentation. I see one hand raised. Enoch, can you go ahead? Enoch, do you hear us?
Sorry, I had not unmuted. Thank you for this opportunity. All right, so my question is, how can machine learning And perhaps AI tools help address challenges of energy citizenship, such as trust, participation, and individual responsibility. Are there like specific examples where perhaps these insights have successfully empowered communities to engage in sustainable energy practices? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I've also been trying to put two and two together. So first I'll start with examples I'm not involved in. In Taiwan, AI has been successfully used to facilitate citizen discussions in an e-citizen assembly. Remember the citizen assembly that Jane presented? So what they do is sortition. So they randomly select 100 members of the just regular population. No, not 100, 10,000. And they perfectly represent the demographics of the whole area of Taiwan. Then they randomly put them into groups of 10. Then they use AI to facilitate the online Zoom discussion about a certain policy topic. Then they use AI to collect the notes from these discussions. And of course, the questions are very well structured by an expert and stuff like that. But the point is they, within a short amount of time, try to gauge how people feel about certain themes. Then they use the results of all of these different notes, of all of these AI facilitated sessions into parliament debates. So somebody summarizes them. So there needs to be good institutional trust that the person summarizing the notes actually are using the notes. So this is somehow settled in Taiwan, but okay. So there's some trust there. These notes go into parliamentary debate. That is the best example I've ever heard of the use of AI for direct democratic processes. Okay. Separate from that is something so we have a new project starting in September, and this Just Reach project that Shalom mentioned in my introduction is this project. Part of that project is using large language models to synthesize all the info, and this is about climate adaptation, less energy, but you can basically use the tool for any topics where there's a large body of information about. But the whole point of this project is creating a large a service, sort of like a chatbot for local governments to use in order for them to match their particular circumstances, demographics, geography, climate, to existing information that exists about best practices, policies for climate adaptation in order to avoid maladaptation. So the tool itself so that has very little to do with citizenship per se, but it's able to synthesize anything, right? So it can synthesize, for example, citizen like notes and meetings and actual opinions in a way that wasn't able to be very well done before. So we're creating right now the technical structure for how to synthesize that in order for policies to be dealt with. So I'll just leave it there. So it's not a direct answer to your question about AI directly connecting with energy citizenship, but just to let you know, the use of AI is a really important link. Oh, one last thing. There's a tool, an online tool created in Finland called Polity. And it's basically an open source AI tool, which basically, if you get a bunch of people discussing a certain topic online, it can cluster the themes that people have cared about. And all it does is return you the 10 clusters of themes that people have really brought up. And then then from there you can use however that information. So it helps to quickly sort through conversation. So and of course you can use that in a variety of different settings. That's already available. So I would encourage you all, more than me, because you're younger, to think in that direction, because it makes a lot of the work that was the barrier to doing this it would take a lot less time, and could no longer be an excuse that it takes too long, blah, blah, blah. because AI is there to help. So I think thinking quickly and newly in that direction is really right. I'm trying to do so, but I'm slower than all of you. So, yeah, if you think of any ideas along those fronts, do let me know. I can learn from you as well.
Thank you so much. Enoch is an undergrad at the Gulu University in Uganda, and he has found a new interest in machine learning, and
Yeah.
he's teaching other students how to use Python for programming and all of that.
Okay.
So I believe he would have something to share with you after the call. I do see another question from Hasmia, but I think she's looking forward to engagement opportunities. So please, Hasmia, reach out to us at RenewWatt. She's in Sierra Leone, so she's looking at how to engage more. Please reach out to us, and we can find some collaborative opportunities for us to do work. I don't see any more questions, and I don't see any more raised hand. Dr. BinBin, give us 1 minute so they can turn on their camera so we take a quick photo of this section.
Oh, sure. Yes.
Thank you so much. Please, let's turn on our cameras. If we're in a comfortable place, we like to see our faces. Okay. Thank you, Enoch, for putting a face to the name that has been asking the questions.
Yes.
Thank you, Clinton, for joining. Thank you, Rosemary.
Thank you.
Hasmia, thank you for joining. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Andrew. Any more persons wants to turn on their cameras? Okay, thank you, Habibwa. And I'll take should we shout citizenship engagement? Would it be too long?
Sure. Yeah.
Maybe energy. Let's give it
Energy. That's good. Let's just do energy. Okay.
Okay, so the count of 3, we shout energy, and I'll take the screenshot. So 1, 2, 3. Energy. Thank you so much. I'll take another one just to have more pictures. Just permit me for one more. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. I really appreciate our time. Yes, I'll share RenewWatt's email in the chat box. Thank you so much, Dr. BinBin.
Okay.
This means a lot.
Thank you, all of you.
Us.
Sure, my pleasure. All right. Thanks for
you.
organizing as well, Shalom. Okay.
Thank you so much. I'll be in touch, and I'll share the presentation with them once I receive it from you.
Yes, I'll send it right away. All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Shalom, and everyone.
Thank you. So let me put the RenewWatt email in the chat box.
Okay.